Ethan Collins stood on the front porch, tie loosened, watching the sun sink over Savannah's old rooftops. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of quiet that made people believe in good marriages. From inside came the clatter of dishes, the hum of the radio, and Maya's soft humming. She always hummed when nervous. He stepped inside, kissed her cheek lightly, catching the faint scent of lavender soap. "Smells great," he said. "It's just chicken," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The house looked like something out of a catalogue. Framed wedding photos, polished floors, everything in its right place. Yet under the soft lighting, the silence between them stretched thin. "Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from. It helps us know how far these stories reach." At dinner, Ethan asked about her shift. "Same as always," she said, slicing her food too carefully. "You?" He shrugged. "Boys at work won't stop talking about family plans. You'd think everyone's trying to repopulate the planet." Maya's fork paused. "You've been thinking about that again?" He gave a low laugh. "Shouldn't I?" She looked down. "I just don't think it's time." He studied her face, searching for the part of her that always dodged truth. "You never think it's time," he said softly. "Maybe I'm waiting for the right moment," she whispered. "Or maybe," he replied, "you're waiting for it to never come." The air thickened. The hum of the ceiling fan filled what words could not. Maya stood, gathering dishes. "You're angry again." "No," he said. "I'm just tired of pretending everything's fine." She didn't respond. In the kitchen, water ran hard against porcelain. Ethan leaned back, staring at their wedding photo on the wall, her hand in his, her eyes fixed on him with a trust he wasn't sure he deserved. Later, in bed, he reached for her. She turned slightly, eyes closed, murmuring, "Not tonight." He lay still, her back a wall between them. Outside, crickets sang like a mocking chorus. "You still love me, right?" he asked in the dark. She hesitated, then said, "Of course," but her voice carried a tremor that didn't sound like love. Hours passed before Ethan drifted off, restless. Maya lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind chasing ghosts of a past she'd buried deep. She could still hear Allison's voice from their last call. "You can't keep this forever, Maya." She pressed her lips together, whispering, "I have to." In the morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, soft and warm, touching faces that no longer knew how to meet. Ethan watched her leave for work, her figure shrinking down the street until she disappeared behind the oak trees. He stood there, coffee growing cold, something uneasy stirring in his chest. The perfect couple, the neighbors would say. He almost believed it himself until the phone buzzed on the counter, screen flashing a name he didn't recognize. Allison R. He stared at it, thumb hovering, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. The phone stopped ringing, but the question stayed, and by nightfall it would begin to eat at him. The house smelled of roasted garlic and candle wax as laughter floated through the dining room. Ethan poured wine for their guests, neighbors who adored Maya's warmth and his quiet humor. From the outside they were a picture of calm, two people glowing in the soft light of friendship. But under the laughter, a strange stiffness lingered, like a string pulled too tight. "So when are you two giving us some baby news?" one of the women teased. Ethan's smile faltered just long enough for Maya to notice. She reached for his hand beneath the table, squeezing gently. "Someday," she said with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. The table filled with knowing chuckles. Ethan's fingers stayed still in hers, cold and unmoving. Later, after the guests left, the house fell quiet again. Dishes clinked softly as Maya washed them, her reflection broken by ripples in the sink water. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You always change the subject," he said finally. "About what? Kids?" She didn't turn. "You know why?" "No," he said, voice sharper. "I don't. I just know every time it comes up, you disappear behind a joke." She sighed, setting a plate down too hard. "Can we not do this tonight?" "Then when?" he asked. The faucet hissed between them like static. "Ethan, please." "You make it sound like I'm asking for the moon," he muttered. "Just an answer." When she turned, her eyes were tired, red at the corners. You want truth, but you don't want pain. What does that even mean? It means there are things about me you don't understand, and maybe you shouldn't have to. Maybe I already don't, he said quietly. Silence stretched until she walked past him, towel in hand. Good night. Her shoulder brushed his, and he felt the space between them widen like an invisible wall. Hours later, Ethan sat alone on the couch, the sound of the clock tapping like a pulse in his ear. He replayed the dinner conversation over and over, the small glances Maya shared with their guests, the tremor in her laugh. He wanted to believe she was just tired, just private, but something colder whispered otherwise. In the bedroom, Maya sat by the window, phone glowing in her hand. A text flashed from Allison. "You can't keep avoiding this forever," Maya typed. "I know." He's starting to ask questions, then deleted it before sending. She stared out at the dark street, the world outside peaceful and distant. When she finally lay beside Ethan, his back was to her, rigid, unmoving. She reached out, her fingers brushing his shoulder, but he didn't stir. She withdrew her hand, turning away again. In the hush between them, the cracks began to spread, silent, invisible, but real enough to change everything that followed. The weekend sun slanted across the living room, catching dust in its light. Maya folded laundry on the couch while Ethan worked on a half-finished shelf, his hammering sharp and restless. When the doorbell rang, she froze for a second before setting the clothes aside. "I'll get it," she said quickly. The woman at the door wore a bright scarf and nervous smile. "Allison," Maya whispered. "Surprise," Allison said softly. "I was in town, thought I'd stop by." Ethan appeared behind Maya, wiping his hands on a towel. "Didn't know we were expecting company." Maya hesitated before smiling too brightly. "This is Allison, an old friend from nursing school." Allison's eyes flicked toward Ethan. "So this is the husband?" He shook her hand, firm but guarded. "You two catch up," he said, walking off, though not far enough to stop listening. The kitchen filled with the smell of coffee and tension. "You shouldn't have come," Maya whispered, glancing toward the living room. "You haven't answered my calls for months," Allison said. "I was worried." "I'm fine." "No, you're not. I saw the article, the one about you changing your legal name. You promised." Maya's eyes darted toward the doorway. "Lower your voice." Ethan's hammering stopped. Silence poured through the hallway. He could hear the faint rhythm of their voices, but not the words, only the urgency behind them. When he stepped closer, Allison's tone shifted. "He doesn't know, does he?" The world seemed to still. Maya froze mid-breath. "Please, Allison," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, tell him when I'm ready." "Ready?" "Maya, there's no right time for this. Secrets don't stay buried forever." Ethan coughed deliberately and walked back into the room. Both women looked up too fast. "Everything okay?" he asked, feigning casual interest. "Fine," Maya said too quickly. "We were just catching up." "Old stories," he said. "You've never told me much about those years." Maya forced a smile. "Not much to tell." Allison studied Ethan, her expression cautious. "You seem devoted." "We both are," Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. "That's good," Allison said softly, though her tone suggested something else. When Allison finally left, Maya stood at the door a long time, watching her walk down the street. Ethan appeared beside her, his voice calm but weighted. "She's nice." "Yeah," Maya said faintly. "How long have you known her?" "Years." "Funny," he said. "Never heard of her?" She turned toward him, meeting his gaze. "Not everything before you matters, doesn't it?" he said quietly. That night, Ethan scrolled through his phone, searching Allison's name. He found nothing but a few photos, Maya laughing beside her years ago, a version of her that looked both familiar and foreign. He stared at the image until the screen dimmed. In the other room, Maya sat in darkness, heart pounding. The knock on the door had reopened more than memories. She could already feel the truth slipping closer, no longer content to stay hidden. Rain drummed softly against the window as Ethan sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop casting pale light over his face. He typed Maya Avery Nursing School, Georgia 2013 into the search bar. Nothing. He tried Maya Collins before marriage. Still nothing. His fingers hovered over the keys before he added Alison R. Maya Avery. One old blog appeared, a volunteer photo, blurry, but Maya's smile unmistakable. Only, the caption beneath it stopped him cold. Michael Avery, 2011 scholarship recipient. He blinked, reading it again. Michael, not Maya. His stomach tightened. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe coincidence. But something dark whispered that it wasn't. When Maya came home, dripping from the rain, Ethan closed the laptop fast. "You're early," he said, voice too casual. "They sent us home," she said, untying her hair. "Storm warning." He nodded, eyes never leaving her face. "Did you ever go by another name in school?" She froze mid-motion. "Why?" "Just curious," he said, pretending to look at his phone. "Someone mentioned an Avery." Her eyes flickered. "I don't know what you're talking about." He smiled tightly. "Sure." She walked off, the air between them suddenly sharp. Later that night, Ethan sat in the garage, pretending to fix the shelf that didn't need fixing. His phone buzzed, a message from an old friend who worked in administration. "Found her record. Some details don't match your marriage license. You sure you want this?" He didn't reply. He didn't know the answer. The next morning he called in sick. As Maya left for work, he followed her, not out of hatred, but a desperate need to see. She stopped by a small clinic downtown, greeted the receptionist like an old friend, then disappeared inside. Ethan waited in the car, rain streaking the windshield, tapping rhythm in sync with his pulse. Hours passed. When she came out, she looked pale, distant, clutching something small in her hand. A folded paper. Ethan watched her stare at it for a long time before tucking it into her purse. She didn't notice his car behind her as she drove home. That night, while she showered, he opened her bag. The paper was damp, but legible. An appointment slip from Dr. Alvarez, Gender Wellness Clinic. His heart dropped. He sat there staring until the steam stopped, until the sound of running water no longer masked the sound of his breathing. When Maya walked out, wrapped in a towel, she saw the slip on the counter. "You went through my things?" she said, voice trembling. Ethan didn't answer. "What were you doing there?" he asked quietly. "You think I don't see what's happening?" Tears gathered in her eyes. "It's not what you think." He laughed once, hollow. "Then what is it?" She stepped closer, shaking. "Please, Ethan, just trust me." But trust by then was no longer something either of them could give. Morning came quietly, the sky pale and colorless. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folded note Ethan had placed on the dresser. "We need to talk tonight." Her hands shook as she picked it up. For a long moment, she simply breathed, as though steadying herself against a wave she could no longer hold back. At work, Alison called twice. Maya finally answered on her break, voice barely above a whisper. "He knows something." "How much?" "Enough to look at me like I'm a stranger." "Maya, you can't let him fill the blanks on his own. You need to tell him before he decides the truth for you." "I tried," she said, eyes glistening. "He doesn't listen when he's angry. He listens to what he fears." That evening, Ethan came home late, smelling faintly of beer and rain. Maya sat at the dining table, dinner untouched, hands clasped tightly. "You wanted to talk," she said softly. He hung his jacket, not looking at her. "Yeah, about the lies." Her throat closed. "I haven't lied?" he scoffed. "Then tell me, what kind of doctor is Alvarez? Because from what I've seen, that's not a dental clinic." Maya stood, her voice trembling. "There's something about me you don't know. I've wanted to tell you since before we married, but I was terrified of losing you, of what you'd think." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Then say it. What could possibly be that bad?" The room seemed to shrink. Her heart hammered as if it could break through her chest. "Please, let's not do this in anger." "And when?" he barked. "When I find out on my own." Her tears spilled, soft and silent. "I didn't marry you to deceive you. I married you because you made me feel human again." "Again?" he repeated, confusion twisting into irritation. What does that even mean? She opened her mouth, the words trembling on her tongue, but before they could form, he slammed his hand against the table. Enough with riddles. You want trust? Then stop hiding behind pity. Maya flinched, then fell silent. Her lips trembled once, twice, and then she said only, "You wouldn't understand." He stared at her for a long time. "Maybe I don't want to," he said finally, voice low and cold. When he left the room, she sank into the chair, shaking. The confession she had carried for years dissolved on her tongue, leaving only the hollow ache of what might have saved them. Hours later, Allison's text flashed on her phone. "Did you tell him?" Maya typed, "No, I couldn't." Then she deleted the message. In the quiet house, Ethan stood outside the bedroom, listening to the faint sound of her sobbing through the door. For a moment, guilt brushed against his chest, but pride was stronger. He turned away, muttering to himself, "If she wants to keep secrets, so can I." And as midnight settled, the distance between them became something permanent, something that would soon demand a reckoning. Neither could escape. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the hallway clock. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Maya's quiet breathing beside him sounded rehearsed, like she was pretending to sleep. He turned to face her, watching the faint outline of her face in the dark, soft, familiar, and yet suddenly foreign. By morning he left for work early, though his mind never left home. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside him hadn't. Every nail he hammered, every board he measured, his thoughts circled the same point. She's lying. About everything. When he came home that evening, Maya wasn't there. Her car was gone, her phone left charging on the counter. He wandered into the bedroom, eyes scanning every surface, every drawer half open. Then, near the closet, he noticed a small box shoved behind her shoes. He pulled it out, old photos, faded documents, a few pieces of jewelry wrapped in tissue. One envelope caught his eye. Cream paper, sealed, his name written in her careful script. "For Ethan, if I can't find the courage." His pulse quickened. He tore it open. Inside was a single folded letter dated months ago. Her handwriting shook slightly, but was clear. "Ethan, there's a truth I've carried since long before we met. I wasn't born with the body I live in now. My name was Michael once. Before the surgeries, before the new life I built, I thought I could leave the pain behind. But love has a way of asking for honesty. I wanted to tell you every day. But each time I tried, I saw how much you loved the woman you thought I was. And I was afraid, not of you hurting me, of you looking at me like I was something broken." His eyes blurred. The page shook in his hand. "I know this isn't what you signed up for, but every touch, every moment was real. You taught me what it means to be seen. I just hope you remember that before you forget who I am." Ethan stood motionless. The clock ticked louder, the sound now unbearable. He read it again, slower this time, as if repetition would make it untrue, but it did. When Maya's car pulled into the driveway, he was still sitting on the floor, letter in hand. The sound of her keys turning in the lock made him rise slowly. She stepped in, smiling softly, until she saw his face. "Ethan?" she said, voice tentative. He held up the letter. "What is this?" Her lips parted, color draining from her face. "Where did you—" "You lied to me." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, I was going to tell you. I just—" "Stop," he said, voice breaking. "Just stop." The paper fluttered from his fingers to the floor between them. The space that had once been their home suddenly felt like the scene of something ending. And as Maya's tears fell silently, Ethan turned away, the letter lying open like a wound neither of them could close. The walls seemed smaller that night. Every shadow moved like a memory Ethan couldn't silence. The letter still lay on the table, creased from where his hands had crushed it. Maya stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself, eyes glistening in the streetlight glow. Neither spoke. The silence had grown teeth. Finally, Ethan turned. "So it's true." His voice was soft, almost fragile. Maya nodded once, her chin trembling. "I wanted to tell you 100 times, but you didn't." He stepped closer. You let me live a lie." "It wasn't a lie," she whispered. "It was my life. The only one I've ever had." He laughed, but it came out like a sob. "Do you have any idea what this does to me? What people would think if they found out?" Her eyes flickered with pain. "You think this is about them? Ethan, I trusted you with everything. You loved me because I was me." He shook his head, pacing, hands pressed to his temples. "You tricked me into loving someone that never existed." "That's not true." Her voice broke. "I didn't trick you. I became who I was meant to be. The person standing in front of you is real." He slammed his fist against the wall, the picture frames rattling. "Stop saying that. Stop pretending this is normal." Maya flinched, but didn't move. "I'm not pretending. I've spent my entire life trying to be seen as human. I never thought it would be you who'd make me feel less than that." He turned, eyes wet, furious. "You think I'm the villain here?" "I think you're scared," she said softly, "and I think you hate yourself for it." The words hit harder than any shout. Ethan's breath came fast and uneven. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. His voice dropped low. "You made me doubt everything. My marriage, my manhood, my faith." Maya's tears fell freely now. "I made you love me. That's all I ever did wrong." The room pulsed with heat and heartbreak. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, the air thick with rain. Ethan turned toward the letter again, picking it up, holding it like proof of betrayal. "You should have told me before you said I do. I was afraid you wouldn't love me if you knew." He stared at her for a long moment, his voice trembling. "You were right." The words broke her. She sank onto the couch, covering her mouth to muffle a cry. Ethan stood motionless, the letter trembling in his hand, his breath heavy and ragged. Minutes stretched into hours. The storm outside deepened, wind pushing against the windows like a warning. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I don't even know who you are." Maya looked up, tears shining like glass. "Then look harder." He turned away, unable to. The lightning flashed through the curtains, carving his silhouette into the wall, a man fractured by love, faith, and something he could never name. And somewhere between that silence and dawn, something inside him broke for good. Morning came grey and heavy. The air in the house felt stale, the kind of quiet that hummed with leftover rage. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of cold coffee, the letter folded neatly beside it. Upstairs, Maya moved softly, packing her things for work, her footsteps careful, as if one wrong sound could shatter what was left. When she came down, her eyes met his for the first time since the night before. "We should talk." "About what?" he said flatly. "There's nothing left to say." "There's everything to say," she whispered. "You don't have to hate me." He exhaled sharply. "I don't hate you, Maya. I just don't know what to call this." He gestured between them. "Empty space where a marriage used to be. Whatever it was," she said quietly. "It was real." He didn't reply. She waited a few seconds longer, then picked up her purse and walked to the door. "I'll be late," she murmured. "Don't wait up." When the door closed, Ethan's hand trembled against the cup. Outside, the rain started again. He didn't go to work that day. He drove instead, nowhere in particular, just through town, past the clinic, past the church, past people who smiled and waved like nothing in the world was wrong. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Every word Maya had said replayed in his head, colliding with every doubt he'd ever had about himself. At a red light he saw two men laughing on the sidewalk, one reaching to fix the other's collar. The intimacy between them twisted something inside him. Envy, anger, confusion, all bleeding into one. He slammed the accelerator, tires hissing through puddles. By afternoon he ended up at a bar, near the river. The bartender nodded in recognition. "Rough day?" Ethan managed a thin smile. "Something like that." The first drink went down fast, the second slower. By the third his hands had stopped shaking. At home, Maya stood in front of the mirror, touching the necklace Ethan gave her on their wedding day. It felt colder now. She thought about calling Allison, then didn't. Instead, she whispered to her reflection, "He'll calm down, he's just hurt." She wanted to believe that. She needed to. As the evening darkened, Ethan returned. The door creaked open. Maya turned from the sink, forcing a small smile. "You're home," he nodded, setting his keys down too hard. The smell of whiskey hung between them. "Did you eat?" she asked gently. "Not hungry. You've been drinking." "So what if I have?" His voice was low, dangerous in its calm. She stepped closer, uncertain. "Ethan." But he was already walking away, down the hall, muttering something she couldn't catch. The thunder outside echoed the weight inside him, loud, restless, unresolved. And upstairs, as she sat on the bed waiting for him to speak again, Maya didn't realize the storm outside wasn't the one she needed to fear. The next few days bled together in silence. Ethan barely spoke, barely slept. When he wasn't working, he sat in the dark, television flickering with no sound. Maya tried to reach him gently, small gestures, small words, but every attempt dissolved in the quiet. The house, once warm, now felt like a cage, with two ghosts pretending to live inside it. One night he came home late again, rain in his hair, eyes glassy. She met him at the door. "You can't keep drinking like this," she said softly. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine," he shot back. She stepped closer, voice trembling. "I'm still the same person you married." "You're not," he said. "You're someone I don't recognize." "I'm someone you never tried to see," she whispered. He brushed past her, slamming his jacket onto the couch. "Do you know what people would say if they found out?" "Who cares what people say?" "I do," he shouted, turning on her. "Because I'm the one they'll look at. The fool. The man who didn't know." Her eyes filled, but she stood her ground. "You care more about your pride than my life. You lied to me," he roared. "You lied about everything." "I lied because you would never have stayed," she said. "You would have seen the name on a paper and walked away before you ever knew me." He laughed bitterly. "Maybe I should have." The words sliced through her. She took a step back, hand covering her mouth. "Ethan, don't," he said. "Don't say my name like you still love me." He turned toward the window, breathing hard. Lightning flashed, illuminating his reflection, eyes wild, hands clenched. Maya watched him, fear starting to seep through her chest. "Please, let's not do this again," she whispered. "You want me to forget it?" His voice was breaking now. "Forget that my wife used to be a man. Forget that everything I believed about us was fake." "It wasn't fake," she cried. "You think love depends on what's between our legs? You think this," she pressed a hand to her heart, "changes because of that?" He stared at her for a long, unbearable moment. Then his voice dropped, low and final. "Maybe it does." Something inside her cracked. She turned away, tears spilling freely now. "Then there's nothing left to fight for." Ethan's breath came unevenly. He wanted to reach for her, to take back the words, but the pride, the fury, the confusion all tangled too deep. He walked past her, out into the rain, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frames on the wall. Maya sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. Outside, thunder swallowed the sound. She whispered through the tears, "I loved you, even when it hurt." Ethan stood in the driveway, drenched, trembling. Somewhere between the rain and his heartbeat, a thought began to take root, dark, poisonous, alive. And by the time he went back inside, he was no longer the same man who had left. The rain hadn't stopped all evening. It fell steady and cold, a curtain against the windows. Maya stood at the sink, chopping vegetables, trying to quiet her mind with the rhythm of the knife. The clock read 8:17 p.m. Ethan was late again. She told herself she didn't care, but every passing minute felt like another thread in her chest pulling tighter. When the door finally opened, she froze. His footsteps were slow, heavy, uneven. The smell of whiskey arrived before he did. He stood in the doorway, soaked through, eyes distant but burning with something deeper than anger. "You cooked," he said. "Didn't think you'd still bother." "Someone has to eat," she murmured. "You're drunk." He laughed quietly, stepping closer. "You say that like it's something new." She turned off the stove. "Ethan, please, let's just talk." "Talk?" he echoed, his voice low and strange. "We've been doing nothing but talking. You talk, I listen, and somehow I still end up feeling like the villain in my own house." "You're not a villain," she said, keeping her voice calm. "You're hurt. I understand that. He slammed his hand on the counter, the sound sharp as thunder. No, you don't. You don't understand what it's like to wake up next to someone you don't know, to realize your life isn't what you thought it was. She flinched, knife clattering into the sink. Ethan. He grabbed the letter from his jacket pocket, crumpled and wet. You wrote this like it was some noble secret. You decided for me. You stole my right to choose. Her eyes filled, tears spilling unchecked. I was scared. Of what? Me? Yes, she whispered. Because you love with conditions. He stared at her, silent for a moment that felt endless. You really believe that? She nodded slowly. If love was unconditional, you'd still see me. He took another step toward her, the distance between them dissolving. All I see is someone who lied. She shook her head. All I see is someone who can't forgive. Lightning flashed, lighting the kitchen in harsh white. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The two of them, the ruined letter, the shattered silence. Then Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. You ruined me. No, she said, tears trembling on her lashes. You were broken long before I came. Something snapped. His hand struck the table, the wine glass toppling, red spilling like blood across the wood. Maya stumbled backward, breath catching. Ethan, stop, please. But the sound of her fear only deepened the rage twisting inside him. His hand shot out, catching her wrist. Tell me it's not true, he said through gritted teeth. Tell me you're still the woman I married. She met his eyes, her voice barely a breath. I am just not the woman you thought you wanted. The room filled with thunder. A scream. The crash of something breaking and then sudden stillness. Rain hammered the roof, washing over everything. In the silence that followed, the house exhaled as though it too had been holding its breath. The rain had turned the night black. Lighting flickered through the kitchen window, lighting everything in brief, terrible flashes. Ethan stood frozen, chest heaving, the knife still trembling in his hand. Maya lay crumpled on the tile, her hair spread across the floor like spilled ink. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the storm, rain pounding the roof, wind howling through the cracks. Then came the sound of Ethan's breathing, sharp and uneven. He dropped the knife. It clattered beside her, streaked red. Maya. The word came out like a plea. He stumbled forward, kneeling, pressing his hand to her shoulder. Maya, look at me. Her eyes fluttered open for a second. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped. Ethan. He pressed his hand harder to the wound, desperate. Stay with me, please. His fingers slipped, smeared with blood. I didn't want this, he said, shaking his head, voice breaking. I just wanted you to tell me the truth. Her lips parted, blood tracing the corner of her mouth. I did, she breathed. You just didn't want to hear it. Her hand twitched against his chest, then fell still. He froze, staring at her face, waiting for movement that never came. The room felt impossibly quiet now, the storm outside fading into the distance. His hands hovered uselessly over her body, trembling. He whispered her name again and again, as if repetition could rewind time. Minutes or maybe hours passed before he moved. His eyes drifted to the knife, then to his blood-stained reflection in the dark oven glass. The man staring back looked nothing like him. His mind clawed for reason, but all he found was emptiness. The refrigerator hummed. A drop of water hit the floor. Somewhere the clock ticked. Ethan's thoughts became slow, deliberate. He stood, breathing hard, his expression blank now. He stepped back from her body as though it was something fragile that might shatter again if he stayed too close. He washed his hands at the sink, the water running pink, then red, then clear. His reflection in the window flickered in and out with every flash of lightning, a ghost of himself, half man, half regret. He went to the living room, picked up the phone, then set it down again. Calling for help would mean admitting what he'd done. Admitting would mean losing the last piece of the life he once believed in. Instead, he sat on the couch, soaked in silence, hands still shaking. The air smelled of rain and metal. The world outside had gone eerily calm, as if even the storm couldn't bear to witness him. When he finally looked toward the kitchen again, Maya's body was bathed in the soft pulse of lightning through the window, still quiet and heartbreakingly small. Ethan whispered her name once more, his voice breaking on it. Maya, but the house didn't answer. Only the faint drip of water from the counter did, blood and rain mixing as one. Ethan sat motionless for a long time, staring at the body on the floor. The silence had turned heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. His mind refused to accept what his eyes saw. It was an accident, he told himself. She slipped. She fell. It wasn't supposed to happen. But when he looked down at his hands, still stained faintly pink despite all the washing, the truth refused to hide. He stood slowly, moving like a man trapped inside someone else's body. The kitchen light buzzed above him, flickering every few seconds. Each flash revealed the chaos. The shattered glass, the overturned chair, the knife glinting beside her. He picked it up, wrapped it in a dish towel and set it on the counter. His breaths came short and shallow. The clock read 11:42 p.m. The neighbors might have heard the shouting, the crash. He had to act fast. He knelt beside Maya one last time, brushing her hair from her face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice shaking. "God, I'm so sorry." Then, with trembling hands, he pulled a blanket from the couch and covered her. For a moment it looked like she was only sleeping. He moved through the house in a trance, wiped the counters, collected the broken glass, threw the towel and the bloodied cloth into a garbage bag. The phone on the counter lit up with a notification, Alison R., but he didn't dare touch it. At 12:10 a.m. he carried the bag to the backyard, rain soaking him to the bone. The mud clung to his boots, the wind stung his face. He opened the garbage bin, paused, and then stopped. No, too obvious. He couldn't leave anything that close. Inside again, the air felt colder, heavier. He changed his shirt, washed his face, stared at himself in the mirror. His reflection looked wrong, eyes wild, mouth twitching between guilt and denial. "You're still a good man," he whispered. "You didn't mean to do it." But even he didn't believe it. He took his car keys, drove through the sleeping streets to a 24-hour gas station on the edge of town. Bought a coffee, forced a smile at the cashier, even made small talk about the rain. Cameras would see him there, timestamp him. An alibi. Back home he parked quietly, the house waiting for him like a confession booth. He glanced through the window, the blanket still where he left it, the shape beneath unmoving. His stomach turned. He sank onto the couch, phone buzzing again. "Alison, Maya, are you okay?" He stared at it, numb, unable to move. Then, with trembling fingers, he deleted the notification. Outside, the rain began to fade. The first light of dawn crept in through the blinds, casting faint gold across the floor. It touched the edge of the blanket, the corner of her hand still visible beneath it. Ethan looked away, whispering the only prayer he still remembered. "Please, let this be a dream." But the dawn didn't lie. By the time the sirens pierced the quiet morning, the sky had turned grey and soft. Neighbors stood in clusters on the sidewalk, robes pulled tight, whispers rising like smoke. The house that once looked so ordinary now pulsed with flashing red and blue lights. Ethan sat on the porch steps, his face pale, his hands shaking just enough to look believable. "I came home and found her like this," he told the first officer, voice rough from sleeplessness. The back door was open. "I think someone broke in." Inside, two paramedics lifted the blanket. One of them glanced at the detective standing nearby and shook his head. Detective Renee Morris, sharp eyes, steady tone, stepped closer. "You're Mr. Collins?" Ethan nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. "We'll take it from here." Her gaze lingered on him for a second too long. "You said the back door was open." "Yes," he replied quickly. "She must have surprised whoever it was. And you didn't call right away?" "I panicked. I drove to the gas station down the road, tried to get signal, called from there. Is that—" Morris wrote something in her notebook. "All right, we'll need to take your clothes for testing." "Of course," he said, eyes darting to the kitchen window. The words felt distant, like someone else was saying them for him. Inside, forensics moved carefully. A gloved hand lifted the knife, now wiped but not enough. Another officer photographed footprints leading from the kitchen to the back porch. Mud. Barely visible, but there. Morris walked slowly through each room. The house smelled of bleach and air freshener, too clean for a crime scene. Her fingers brushed the counter smooth, polished. He cleaned, she murmured to herself. Too soon. When she returned to the porch, Ethan was still sitting there, shoulders hunched, eyes on the street. She crouched beside him. "Mr. Collins, I know this is hard, but can you tell me, did your wife have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt her?" He hesitated. "No, everyone loved Maya. He swallowed hard. She was kind." Morris studied him quietly. "I'm sure she was." A few minutes later, the coroner's team wheeled the stretcher out. Ethan's breath hitched. He didn't look at her face, just at the edge of the blanket covering her. For the first time, he realized how final it was. There would be no more pretending, no more words to fix it. When the last of the officers left, Morris stood in the doorway, eyes sweeping the room one more time. On the refrigerator, a small magnet held a photo of the couple, smiling, arms wrapped around each other, a perfect snapshot of something that no longer existed. She took note of the magnet's slight tilt, the clean counters, the faint smell of detergent. "Something's off," she murmured. Outside, Ethan sat motionless in the drizzle. His hands were cold, his heartbeat slow and unsteady. The street was quiet again, too quiet, and from that silence a new sound began, the first whisper of suspicion. Detective Renee Morris returned to the Collins house 2 days later. The air had turned colder, the autumn wind carrying the faint scent of pine and rain. Police tape fluttered loosely on the porch rail. Inside, the house still held its silence, but the kind that no longer grieved, it waited. Ethan sat at the table, looking exhausted, unshaven, hollow-eyed. She laid a folder down between them. "We got the preliminary report," she said evenly. "There were traces of bleach on multiple surfaces. That's unusual." "I panicked," Ethan said quickly. "Didn't know what else to do." "You also cleaned the knife," she replied, voice soft but pointed. "Forensics picked up partial prints underneath the white surface." "Yours." He froze. "It's my house. Of course my prints are there." She didn't argue. Instead, she slid another document across the table. "Your wife's medical history came in too. We found something you might want to see." He stared down at the page, his pulse pounding in his ears. It was the same truth he'd already buried inside himself. Michael Avery, gender reassignment completed. "She never told me," he muttered. Morris watched him carefully. "When did you find out?" He hesitated. "After she died," he lied. Her gaze didn't waver. "Neighbors said they heard shouting the night before." "You want to tell me what that was about?" "We argued," he said quietly. "Like any couple." She nodded slowly. "You said she had no enemies, but when something like this comes out," she tapped the file lightly. "Secrets can twist people. Someone might have used this to hurt her." Ethan's breath caught. "Are you saying someone else knew?" "That's what we're trying to find out." She closed the folder. "We've contacted a woman named Allison R. She's been calling your wife's phone since the night she died." The name hit him like a strike to the ribs. "She's an old friend. Old enough to text her every few hours for 3 days straight?" He said nothing. "Mr. Collins," she continued gently, "I know this isn't easy, but secrets don't die with the people who keep them. Sometimes they just move to the next person in line." Her words hung heavy in the air. When she left, the house seemed smaller again. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at the faint stains that no scrubbing could erase. The letter still sat folded in the drawer, burning a hole in his conscience. That evening, the news broke. The headline flashed across every local channel: "Nurse found dead in Savannah home. Police probe gender identity twist." Ethan sat alone on the couch, the TV's blue glow washing over his face. Reporters spoke of betrayal, secrets, marriage, and sin. Commentators argued over whether she'd deceived him. No one talked about love. He turned off the screen, his chest tight. Outside, flashbulbs flickered through the windows. For the first time, Ethan realized the story was no longer his to control. And for the first time, guilt began to sound a lot like fear. 3 days later, Detective Renee Morris sat across from Ethan in a narrow interrogation room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and metal, the hum of the overhead light constant and unforgiving. He looked thinner now, worn down by sleepless nights and the constant echo of his own heartbeat. She placed a small recorder on the table. "This is just a conversation," she said gently. "You're not under arrest. I just need to understand what happened that night." Ethan nodded weakly. "I've already told the officers everything."
"I know," she replied. "But what you told them doesn't explain the inconsistencies. The bleach, the missing 2 hours before you called 911, the gas station stop that felt rehearsed."
He rubbed his temples. "I didn't kill her. I didn't say you did," she said softly. "But I think something happened between you two that you haven't been able to say out loud." He looked up slowly, eyes hollow. "You ever loved someone so much it scared you?" Renee leaned back. "Once. Then you know what it's like when love starts turning into something else. Something darker." His voice trembled. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I just wanted her to tell me the truth. That's all I wanted." "She did tell you," the detective said, "didn't she?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "She lied for years. Or maybe she survived for years," Renee said. "There's a difference." He blinked, her words cutting through the fog. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand. I woke up one morning and didn't know who I was anymore. Every part of me felt wrong. Like my marriage, my manhood, everything I'd built, none of it was real." He stared at his hands. "I tried to walk away that night. I swear I did. But she kept saying my name, begging me to listen. And I did, for a moment. But then I looked at her and saw everything I wasn't, everything I couldn't be." Renee didn't move. "I grabbed the knife," he continued, voice trembling. "I didn't even think. It was just anger. Not at her. At me. At what I'd become." The silence that followed was suffocating. Renee finally spoke, quiet but clear. "You know this changes everything, right?" He nodded slowly. "I know." She turned off the recorder, folding her hands. "Ethan, I believe you loved her. I also believe love doesn't make what you did right." Tears welled in his eyes, spilling onto the table. "I know," he whispered again, "but she forgave me before she died. I saw it. In her eyes." Renee exhaled, her expression unreadable. "Forgiveness isn't the same as freedom." He lowered his head, trembling. "Then maybe I don't deserve either." Outside the window, rain began again, soft, relentless, like the world itself was grieving. And for the first time since that night, Ethan didn't fight the truth. He let it sit with him, heavy, final, and impossibly real. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with whispers. Reporters filled the back rows, pens ready, cameras poised. The story had already escaped the walls of Savannah. It was national now. Every headline had a version of his name. The husband who didn't know love and lies in Georgia. A marriage built on secrets. Ethan sat beside his attorney, wearing the same grey suit he'd worn to Maya's funeral. His face looked older now, his eyes dull but calm, as if the storm inside him had finally burned itself out. Across the aisle sat Allison, shoulders trembling, clutching a photo of Maya against her chest. The judge entered. The room rose, then settled. "State of Georgia versus Ethan Collins," the clerk read. "Charge, second-degree murder." The prosecutor began steady, deliberate. She painted Ethan as a man undone by pride and fear. "This wasn't rage," she said. "It was control. He couldn't stand losing the image he built for himself, so he destroyed the one person who threatened it." His attorney countered. "This was not murder. This was a tragedy born of deception, confusion, and emotion." He snapped. "He's not a monster. He's a man who lost his sense of self in one unbearable moment." Renee Morris sat quietly in the gallery, watching. She'd heard every story before. Men who claimed love turned them violent. But as she studied Ethan's stillness, something felt different. Not innocent. Just hollow. When Ethan took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. His voice was steady, low. "I loved her, every part of her. But the night she told me, something broke. Not just in me, In the world I thought I lived in. The prosecutor leaned forward. So you're saying the truth killed her? He met her gaze. No, I did. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Allison's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan continued softly, and I'd take it back if I could. Every word, every second. But you can't undo what you do in the dark. The judge's gavel struck once. Order. After closing arguments, the jury filed out. Hours passed. Rain began to fall again, outside the courthouse, faint against the windows. Allison whispered a prayer. Renee stood by the back wall, arms crossed, her eyes never leaving him. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. The foreman rose, voice trembling slightly. We find the defendant, Ethan Collins, guilty of second-degree murder. The sound hit like thunder. Ethan didn't move. His lawyer touched his arm, but he stayed still, staring straight ahead, lips barely parting as if to speak, but nothing came. The judge's voice echoed distantly. Sentence will be set at a later date. Defendant is remanded to state custody. Two officers approached. Ethan stood, wrists trembling as the cuffs clicked shut. Allison's sob broke the silence. Renee watched him pass, her expression unreadable. As he was led away, Ethan turned once, glancing toward the photo of Maya on the prosecution's table. For a fleeting second he smiled, sad, broken, and full of something that almost looked like love. The cell was small, grey, and cold, with a single window that looked out toward a sliver of sky. Ethan had stopped counting the days. Time in prison wasn't measured by clocks anymore. It was measured by memory. And most days he lived inside one. Maya's letters sat in a neat stack beneath his pillow. He'd read them all hundreds of times, though most were never meant for him to see. The first few were gentle, lists, reminders, pieces of her day. The later ones grew deeper, written long before the night that destroyed them both. Words he'd never deserved but clung to anyway. He unfolded one now, paper worn soft from his hands. Her handwriting looped with quiet grace. Ethan, I know one day the truth will surface. I hope when it does, you'll remember who I really am. Not what I used to be. The truth doesn't destroy love. Fear does. And fear is what we should have fought together. He traced each line with his finger, his throat tightening. The hum of the fluorescent light above him blurred into the sound of her voice in his memory, soft, patient, the way she used to call his name. Across the hall, a guard passed by, pausing when he noticed Ethan reading again. Mail from home, he asked. Ethan didn't look up. Something like that. The guard nodded, moving on. Ethan set the letter down carefully, staring at the ink stain in the corner where her tears had once fallen. For a long time he said nothing. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, I see you now, Maya, all of you. The light flickered. The wind outside howled softly through the vents. Somewhere far beyond those walls, autumn was ending. In the small library that week, a counselor asked the inmates to write something they regretted. Ethan wrote a single line. I mistook my own shame for truth. He folded it, tucked it into the back of Maya's last letter, and left it inside his Bible. When night came, he lay on the thin mattress, staring up at the ceiling. He imagined her standing in the kitchen again, smiling over her shoulder, her hair catching the light. He remembered the way she used to hum when nervous, the way her laughter filled the house like sunlight. The image stayed with him until his breathing slowed, until the world softened into quiet. Outside the prison walls, rain began again. Gentle, forgiving, endless. And in the half-light of that dawn, Ethan whispered her name one last time, not as a plea, not as guilt, but as something close to love.